Hey Internet, welcome to the inaugural album review video for Apathy and Arpeggios. And with that being said, I wish it was coming to you under better circumstances. I'm sure by now you're all well aware of the untimely death of one of rock music history's most notable heroes over a week ago, being David Bowie. I have to be completely upfront with the fact that I did not plan on reviewing this album posthumously. It just seemed like a great place to start when I originally conceived the idea for this vlog. And so it's with genuine remorse that I bring you this very first review for Apathy and Arpeggios, David Bowie's Blackstar. I'd say that David Bowie is a performer who doesn't really need an introduction at this point. Blackstar is David Bowie's 25th studio album, 28th if you count his work under the moniker Tin Machine and of course his soundtrack work. Blackstar is a follow-up to his 2013 release The Next Day, which in comparison is a much more straightforward alternative rock album. Whereas Blackstar is a return to his more experimental phase. There's elements of jazz, there's elements of progressive, there's elements of art rock. And that's just scratching the surface. The songs on Blackstar are more ambiguous in nature. There's a theme of mortality constantly running throughout the record. And that's what people are generally talking about this last week. They're referring to the album as a last hurrah, a final goodbye, a swan song, if you will. And this is something that's realized on the surface, you know, if you take away the death surrounding the album. And I wouldn't exactly say that my perception of this album has changed all that much compared to when I was listening to it a few days before he died and listening to it now. And while it's certainly prominent throughout the record, mortality isn't the only theme present. One thing that David Bowie has certainly made an art out of throughout his career is finding his raw inspiration in some really unlikely places. According to the people he worked with really closely on the album, such as longtime chief producer Tony Visconti, he was really into Kendrick Lamar while he was writing this album. Even his studio saxophonist Danny McCaslin came out and said that some of the lyrics, namely on the title track of the album, were inspired by ISIS. Although that hasn't been confirmed by the rest of his bandmates, and it likely never will at this point. The style of the music on this album really flows between experimental jazz and progressive rock. And really this is one of those albums where you will get one track that's really interesting and kind of peculiar, followed by one that's a little more grounded. And what I mean by this is that there are a couple of pleasant ballads sort of breaking up the album, like Lazarus or Dollar Days. And these tracks are the ones that are causing a lot of discussion. The lyrics and the subject matter seem to be a little more foreboding of his imminent death. With that being said, what makes David Bowie such a great artist is that he doesn't just take one idea and put it on paper and boom, you've got a song. There are plenty of other areas in art and culture that Bowie likes to cultivate when writing a song. Out of the 25 studio albums that Bowie has put out over his career, 13 of them have been produced by his good friend Tony Visconti, including this one. And apparently there was even some percussive help on the album provided by LCD Soundsystem frontman James Murphy, although Visconti has disclosed that his involvement on the album wasn't as much as they originally hoped it would be. That being said, it's kind of understandable given that Murphy is currently involved with the rebirth of his band. So the themes that play on throughout the album show up in the very first track, which is the title track of the album. The track is about 10 minutes long, and it's pretty much an epic. It's mysterious sounding, it's kind of sort of has this unsettling vibe to it. Part of what interests me most about this song is the percussion in it. It's got this very irregular, sort of fragmented time signature to it, at least at the beginning of the song. And the song's really built around these sort of opaque lyrics. It really can be interpreted in so many different ways. And these kind of unsettling strings and horns combined with Bowie's wavering vocal style give the song this very haunting quality. At least this is how the song starts out. At about the halfway point, it shifts to this more hopeful melody, kind of reminiscent of glam rock era Bowie. It kind of has that sort of theatrical element to it. And just like so many different points throughout the album, the lyrics can be interpreted in so many different ways. Here it sounds like Bowie is describing some sort of being who's being reborn or resurrected to sort of save or guide a doomed society of some sort. Anyways, one important thing noting here during this section is that the drums, the percussion, they slow down to this mid-tempo, and it carries on throughout the rest of the track. But really, while these drums are carrying on at sort of a 4/4 time signature, the original melody from the beginning of the song, as well as the original lyrics and lyrical structure, make a return, and it just sort of carries on from there for the rest of the track. And that's how the track finishes. It's very ghostly, haunting, unsettling. I've said all these adjectives before, and damn it, I'll say it again. Moving on from there, the pacing picks up with the second track called "'Tis a Pity She Was a Whore." Lyrically, the song appears to sort of narrate a turbulent encounter between a prostitute and her client, or maybe a mistress and her man. And really what's so great about these lyrics is that even though they're quite eloquent in nature, Bowie kind of plays with some colloquialisms. For instance, the first line of the song goes, "Man, she punched me like a dude." And the thing about Bowie's voice in this song is that he puts on this sort of wavering, crooning falsetto that despite his age and despite his sickness that he's going through at the time, he's still able to hit these high notes. Musically speaking, the song gradually builds up in intensity. There's these shrieking horns, there's these synths that are building up, the repetitive drum beat, and David Bowie's background vocals in a choral sense really complement the track nicely, and it all sort of comes together and intersects and clashes at the same time. Getting back to how Bowie has a sort of unorthodox way of finding inspiration for his songs, this song is kind of violent in nature. It dates back to a John Ford restoration play from the 17th century of the same name. And apparently this song serves as a sort of metaphor for the shocking realness of World War I. Lazarus is one of the more grounded tracks on this album. And just like the rest of the album, it's very beautiful, but it's also very sad. Especially now after his death, when you look at the lyrics, it's become more and more clear that they're from his point of view as he's living his final months of life and he's feeling the impending doom of death. Really what most people are saying about this track in particular is that it's one of the more obvious examples on the album where he's singing about his own demise. The song starts out with the lyrics, "Look up here, I'm in heaven. I've got scars that can't be seen. I've got drama that can't be stolen. Everybody knows me now." Anyways, the track is a very strong ballad. It's got a great horn section, and it's very tragic, but also very beautiful. From there we go to the track "Sue" or "In a Season of Crime." This is another really intriguing song on the record, as it was originally written in 2014 and crafted as this big band jazz number. But as it's refashioned for this album, it's turned out as this progressive rock track. It's fast-paced and has maybe just a little bit of hint of industrial in it. What's funny about this track isn't so much the irregular time signature, it's that it's vaguely reminiscent of his foray into electronica and drum and bass in the late 90s. Anyway, it's a very effective track and it's very much solidified in this album, but if I had to pick a possible weak spot on this album, it would have to be this track. It doesn't have the same sort of emotional quality to it that the original 2014 jazz version did. The next track, "Girl Loves Me," starts off just plain weird, but in a good way. On this track, Bowie sort of employs this yelping vocal style that's not quite singing, not quite spoken word. And what seems like gibberish in the lyrics is actually a combination of two different variations of pop culture language, one being Nadsat, which is the language spoken in Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, the other being Polari, which was a variation of gay slang used in 1970s England. Anyway, I guess this is Bowie technically being playful with his music. The song moves in this sort of weird processional style. In order to find out what the song is really about, you have to be willing to go digging for clues. Dollar Days is another tragic sounding ballad on the album. But what's different about this one is he chooses to sort of forebode his impending death with a reflection on his past life and his career and his successes and his failures. It's a very straightforward, melodic track. It's very pleasant sounding. It's also a very good example of just how prominent Bowie is with accessing unexpected key changes throughout his music. And from there, the song sort of dissolves and nicely transitions into the final track, I Can't Give Everything Away. The song is sort of characterized by this passive drum machine beat and the synths sort of backwashing over the track. There's also this harmonica riff which sort of soars over the background of the track, and it's vaguely familiar with the harmonica riff in his song Career in a New Town off of his 1977 album Low. It's a very atmospheric track, and compared to the rest of the album, lyrically, it's sort of minimal, very repetitive. Anyway, it's a very emotional song, but it's also kind of hopeful sounding for a final goodbye. This album is a very engaging listen, and for someone who constantly liked to play off of the trends of the times and use those as an inspiration in his music, Bowie breaks new ground in this thing, and it couldn't have come at a better time. Ultimately, this would be the part of the video where I would break down the album in terms of pros and cons and also give it its final grade. Because of his untimely death, I'm going to reserve judgment in that aspect. All I'm going to say is that I think this is a great album. It's definitely worth a listen, definitely worth a buy. I think it's some of his most fruitful, most experimental work since 1970s Berlin trilogy. Feel free to leave a comment on the video what your thoughts on the album are, and if you have any future suggestions for reviews, feel free to let me know. For Apathy and Arpeggios, I'm Chris Dobigan. David Bowie, Blackstar.